Good morning, everyone. If I may just invite all of you to have a seat, please. Thank you very much. And thank you as well for joining us for the 7th Annual Clean Energy Business Council Summit. It's a pleasure to have all of you here in the room. My name is Mihaela Nina, and the reason why I'm here today is because it gives me an immense honor and pleasure to host the Clean Energy Business Council Annual Summit. And apart from this, my professional life revolves around sustainability and the SDGs, both as an entrepreneur and podcast host. Throughout the day, we will hear from exceptional speakers, experts and leaders in sustainability and clean energy whom support our transition towards achieving a greener economy. I hope each one of you is going to have as key takeaway an accurate overview of our progression towards achieving sustainability in the energy sector and beyond. As everyone should have today's program, and as we have a full agenda for the hours to come, I'm not going to take too long to go through it entirely. However, I would like to highlight that our summit is going to consist of 3 main parts. From now until 11:15 a.m., we will start with 2 keynote speeches and a panel presentation, followed by a 15 minutes coffee break for everyone that would like to network and just recharge a little bit. We will then have 2 panel discussions between 11:30 and 1:15 p.m., followed by a lunch break, an hour and 15 minutes. And the last part of the day is going to contain a presentation, a panel discussion, an innovation session between 2:15 and the end of the day, everything concluding at approximately 4:35, 5 p.m. So I do hope that I'll see you throughout the day here. Now, in order to enable a better interaction with our speakers during the panel discussions, I would need to ask you all to take out your mobile phones. Of course, put them on silent first so that we manage to interact properly, but access Slido at either slido.com or sli.do and access the event by using a hashtag CEBC 2019. So if you would like to ask any questions through the panel discussions, either to the moderator or to the speakers themselves, and if you're targeting a particular person, just make sure that you type in @ followed by your question. Now, I couldn't have ended this without thanking each one of you once again for being here with us today, and of course extending our sincere gratitude to Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Knowledge Foundation and for hosting us during the Knowledge Summit. It's time for us to get started with the first topic of the day, as clean energy is a key topic around the world, and it goes hand in hand with both Sustainable Development Goal 13, climate action, as well as with the Paris Agreement. I guess we all are wondering what is the direction that we are heading into. Forums and summits around the world, like the one that each one of you is attending today, are calling for more action, be it through regulatory frameworks, be it through organizations shifting to clean economy, to clean energy sources, or even for the financial sector steering investments in this arena. Taking us through this and more, we will have Dr. Nasser Saidi. Dr. Saidi is the chairman of the Clean Energy Business Council and president of Nasser Saidi and Associates, as well as hold numerous directorship and board roles in the region with institutions such as the IMF and OECD. Prior to this, Dr. Saidi served as chief economist and strategist at the DIFC, as well as Minister of Economy and Trade and Minister of Industry of Lebanon between 1998 and 2000. I think there is much more to be said about Dr. Saidi, but instead of doing so, let me just invite him to the stage. Let's give him a big round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you, Mihaela. Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, everybody. And thank you for joining us at the CBC Annual Summit. I think the weather is having an impact on participation, as I understand. People have stayed at home rather than come out. But thank you for being with us. I'm going to just have some opening remarks, really, in terms of launching our day. There's a lot of activity that has been taking place during 2019 already. in terms of where are we with respect to the Paris agreements, where are we with respect to sustainability, where are we heading. So I'm going to, in this short presentation, just go through quickly in terms of what's happening at a global level in terms of clean energy and clean technology developments, then talk a little bit more about the MENA region, and then, of course, talk more about the CBC and what it does. At a global level, I think what's happening is that despite the Paris agreements, despite various sustainability goals, we're having global energy consumption actually increased in 2018 at twice the average since 2010. And of course, part of that is due to economic recovery after the great financial crisis. But at the same time, if you look at CO2 emissions, they've been increasing at a rate of 1.3% annually over the past 5 years. So although many countries now have their goals in place, you're still having a large increase in terms of CO2 emissions. We are not reaching our goals in terms of maintaining global warming at 2%. It is highly unlikely that we will reach that goal. But what I wanted to point out to is the Middle East share of global emissions recorded 6.3% as a total in 2018. That's just about double the GDP contribution of the MENA region. So we consume a lot of energy, and we contribute a lot to global emissions. And particularly, that is particularly true in the GCC countries. Some good news, however, is in terms of technology. And of course, we all know that solar power and wind power costs have been declining. They've declined some 80% in the past 6 years. So a very substantial decline in the cost of technology. And as a result of that, countries have been adopting solar power and wind power. And if you look at the capacity in terms of investments over the past 10 years, the middle chart, you'll see that the biggest buildup of capacity, of course, has been in China. China has been very much, of course, the leader in terms of solar power, both in terms of production, but increasingly in terms of installed capacity. And by far the fastest and biggest investor in terms of solar. So it dwarfs the United States. The other, of course, leader is, of course, Europe, which you'll see at the bottom. So two things really have happened over the past decade is that solar has been the leader in terms of renewable energy and technology, but at the same time, it is China that has led that movement. If we look at our part of the world, that's the right-hand side panel, the last right-hand side panel, we have really built up very little capacity in our part of the world, despite the comparative advantage that we have in terms of solar power availability. So UAE is still building up. Saudi is coming up very quickly. And you've got the major country which has invested a lot is, of course, Morocco with Desertec. By the way, the last column shows the growth. That's the growth in investment compared to 2017. So although it looks negative for some countries, including the UAE, that's because you had a high growth in terms of investments, build-up capacity in 2017. So you've built up less capacity in 2018. So a major message, I think, is that if you look at our part of the world, we're certainly under-investing. We're not investing at the rate we should and could be investing, given the large decline in solar power costs. One thing that has been encouraging, of course, is that Dubai, in particular, has been able to sign agreements in terms of solar power at very, very low rates. The most recent one was a world record of about 1.6 cents per kilowatt. So expect a large buildup in the years to come. If we look at clean energy and renewable energy investments, we know that we need, if we want to achieve our goals by 2050, you need about at least 95 trillion. But to have a sustainable growth and remain below 3% warming, you're going to need another $15 trillion worth of investments. These are from IRENA. They may be an underestimate because at the moment we're just looking at only the sets of countries which are now investing. Once Africa starts ramping up its energy consumption because of the demographics and because of higher growth in Africa, I think we're going to have to revise upwards the investments that are required for sustainability on a longer term basis. So although 15 trillion additional is going to be required, it is likely that over time our estimate of what is required in terms of investments is going to have to rise. And just to go back a second, if you look at energy efficiency in terms of the types of investments that you need, that's estimated at around 31% right now. So out of your total clean energy and renewable energy, some 31% needs to go to energy efficiency type investments, improvements in terms of how do we use energy more efficiently. And notice one thing which is important about our part of the world: we are highly energy inefficient. On average, the GCC countries and the rest of the MENA region uses twice as much energy per unit of GDP as the average OECD countries. So we do waste a lot of energy. So energy efficiency, as I'll point out a bit later, is a low-hanging fruit in terms of where we want to move forward. So if you look at energy efficiency, on average, energy efficiency has been improving on average globally at about 2% per year. So if you look at, say, Europe today is now using the same amount of energy as it used back in 2010. So energy efficiency has meant that you're using less energy per unit of GDP. But if we want to really achieve sustainability goals, we need to be improving energy efficiency at the rate of about 3.2% per year. And you'll notice from that, the bottom chart in blue, that the annual change in primary energy efficiency has not been improving, it's starting to decline again. So the bottom, the blue bar, is not improving at the same rate as it was before, which is telling you that the rate at which we are making investments to improve energy efficiency is not yielding results, or that we're not making sufficient investments. The right-hand side panel shows that, again, most of it is in Europe. Latin America is improving its energy efficiency. China, a major player, that's in yellow. But we, in terms of the Middle East and Africa, are still not much on the map. We have underinvested in terms of energy efficiency. So a major message, I think, for all of us involved in this industry is that energy efficiency is a low-hanging fruit. That's where you need to make the investments. If we just make energy efficiency investments at the same rate as the average OECD countries, we can reduce energy utilization by some 30% in the region. So that's the low-hanging fruit. So before you start with anything else, improve energy efficiency. I think this needs to be one of the major messages. The second, I think, in terms of the outlook and where we're heading, is about electric vehicles. If you look at energy consumed by the transport sector, it uses up 15 to 20% of total energy requirements. So the promise really, as we move ahead in terms of electric vehicles, they become much more energy efficient, and that would be a major way to reduce your energy consumption. If you look at some of the forecasts, and these are from Bloomberg's New Energy, they're looking at total EV stocks, electric vehicle stocks, to grow to about 550 million about by 2040, representing some 32% of total passenger vehicles. And similarly, you'll have a big move towards light commercial vehicles. China is already at the forefront in terms of this, in terms of electric buses, in terms of light vehicles. But there's also a move increasingly towards heavy vehicles. Companies like Iveco and others are planning to stop diesel and usual fossil fuel using vehicles, trucks, by 2025. They'll be moving towards electric vehicles as it goes forward. But of course, what you need in terms of this big investment in electric vehicles is, of course, you need a regulatory framework. Many of our countries don't have the infrastructure, but they also don't have the regulatory framework for electric vehicles and their utilizations. If I take, for example, the UAE, every time you want to put in a charger somewhere, you get charged for an installation, and there's an annual fee for the installation. So instead of giving the incentives to install the charging infrastructure, which we require, it is being taxed at the moment. So many changes need to be taking place in terms of the regulatory framework to facilitate electric vehicles. Now, in connection with this, we've set up a future mobility working group, a future mobility club, and I'll mention that at the end of my talk. So many of the CBC members are involved in terms of the electric vehicles movement. And finally, I think at a global level, if you think of where we're heading, it's clear that by 2050, all the forecasts are that we'll probably have something like 62% of total energy, the total energy mix coming from clean energy and renewable energy by then. And about half of that will come from wind and solar. So within that, I think that might be an optimistic forecast, because you've still got quite a bit of investment still taking place in coal and other dirty energy sources. And the final message in terms of global elements is climate change risk. And here I think there's some positive and good news coming out from the banking sector. A number of central banks, some 30 central banks globally, led by the Bank of England and the Banque de France, have raised the warning that climate risk can have a big impact on the banking and financial sector. And you can easily see that already today in terms of climate change, in terms of physical risks, because of hurricanes, all sorts of weather events, they're having an impact already on the insurance industry. Only 1/3 of climate-related risks are insured. So the 2/3 of climate-related risks are largely uninsured. For the 1/3 that is insured, that's going to have a big impact on terms of the insurance industry. But the banking and financial industry itself is also exposed to all the fossil fuel activities, such as the oil companies, coal companies, and everybody else. And at the same time, they've made large investments in terms of assisting fossil fuel-based activities. So as climate risks increase, and as on a global level we start shifting towards less use of fossil fuels, the major exposure is going to be of the going to be with the financial system. So the central banks are now proposing that we now have much more climate finance related disclosure in financial statements. That's going to be a big change in the next 5 to 10 years. That means that not only the banking and financial sector will have to disclose how exposed they are to climate risks, but companies themselves will have to start disclosing their climate risk exposure. So it goes beyond ESG, environment, corporate social responsibility, and corporate governance, to look at how exposed you are to climate-related risks. This is going to be a major change in the years to come, affecting all types of disclosure, and affecting the accounting industry, the banking industry, and the insurance industry. So look out for that. Let me turn quickly to our own part of the world. I don't need to remind you how vulnerable we are. We are in a region of the world that is, in many cases, desertic. We have very low water availability. Much of the water that we do have available originates from outside our region. And if you look at that water availability and the lack of it, given the demographics, it might very well lead to water wars in years to come. Look at what's happening, for example, between Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt. And at the same time, because of these climate-related risks, we're starting to get mass displacement of population. So, and particularly in Africa and sub-Saharan Africa. That could affect a large number of our countries, including Syria, Iraq, and others. So one of the major vulnerabilities we have is mass displacement of population because of climate-related risks. And we haven't really addressed that. Second major risk is stranded assets risk. What we mean by stranded assets is that because of the shift away from fossil fuels and increasing use of renewables like solar, the price of oil in particular will be declining over time. And it could decline so much that it will no longer be economic to extract the oil that you have in the ground. So in many countries, they might end up finding that much of their mineral and natural resource wealth is not worth what it currently is. And that means a lot of those assets could become stranded assets. The way to de-risk from that is to do what Saudi Arabia is now currently trying to do by privatizing your oil-producing companies. Aramco is the first example, but we might have other examples of countries around the region where to de-risk the stranded assets, the best way is to list your oil companies and share those risks on a global basis. So expect more of that to happen in the future. But it also means that your banking and financial sector, particularly in our part of the world and the GCC, is highly invested in the fossil fuel industry. They finance the oil companies, both upstream and downstream. So with time, the banks themselves will also be exposed. And with time, we also want the banks to start de-risking their portfolios. So some of the ways forward, I've listed those quickly here. You need to start removing fossil fuel subsidies to lower energy utilization. And that means your fuel and oil will be exported rather than used domestically. Starting using green bonds and blue bonds, and in particular carbon taxation, I think is going to be the way forward for many of our countries. Let me insist a little bit on carbon taxation, because we've got two issues. We know already that we're using a lot of energy. Part of the reason for that, of course, is that we continue to subsidize energy use. Petrol prices are still below world averages. The UAE has improved in terms of getting prices close to the international level, but other countries, a major country like Saudi Arabia, still has fuel at very, very low prices, which encourages a lot of waste. So the first thing, of course, is removing subsidies, but the next step really is to improve by efficiency, by taxing carbon. If you did that, you would improve energy efficiency, you would encourage real energy and clean energy investments, and of course, you will accelerate your energy transition. We've calculated a little bit what the potential revenues would be from $20, $40, and $70 a ton. If you look at the example of the UAE, right at the bottom, for $20 per ton, the UAE could raise $5.5 billion worth of resource, government resource. At $40, you'd be able to raise 11 billion, and at $70, about 19 billion. These might not look like big numbers, but they're more than twice what the UAE is raising in terms of VAT. So rather than put in VAT, which is also very costly to administer and to collect, imposing a carbon tax could raise much more revenue and much more efficient for the environment. So just 2 words about our Clean Energy Business Council. You've got some papers in front of you which explain what it is. We're an advocacy group in terms of trying to improve the adoption of clean energy and clean technology across the region. We are a not-for-profit organization. We are there to improve dialogue between government or the public sector and the private sector, but also in terms of trying to put in place regulations and policy frameworks that will encourage real energy, clean energy, and clean technology. And in order to do so, we've set up a number of working groups. There's one on energy efficiency. There's a Future Mobility Club, which I mentioned. We have a climate finance working group. We have a very active Women in Clean Energy working group, and they had a major session yesterday. And we also have a schools program where our members go out to high schools and talk about the environment, energy efficiency, and how you can improve that. So just the final message, I'd like to obviously invite you to participate and become members. You can be an individual member, a company member, or you can become a partner of the CBC, like a number of our companies. And let me just thank our sponsors today, starting with the Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Knowledge Foundation, but also York, Johnson Controls, Denton's, and Ameya Power. So thank you very much, and I look forward to a good day together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saidi. I think that there are many takeaways from this session. In particularly, on one side, we are obviously in a region which is vulnerable to climate risks, as it was very well highlighted by Dr. Saidi. But on the other hand, technology is an enabler in order to support our transition towards more clean energy sources.